So let me share my cam with you. So I guess you can see me now, right? You can see and hear me, and you can also see the screen that I'm sharing, right? Okay, good. Okay, I think we need to kind of record the class, and this is number 12, right? This is class 12, everyone. Okay. So okay. So right, Dr. Sam and class class 12, and we are on our way. The class is being recorded as usual. Okay. So what is it that we have today? Or we're approaching night, let's say tonight. Okay, today we're having Shelley. Last time it was all about Wordsworth, right? And Wordsworth and Shelley are romantic poets, and by now we know what romantic poets are and what romantic poetry is all about, right? We're not mixing, we're not confusing between romantic poetry and romance anymore. And what else did we say about the romantics? We said that we're talking about two generations. We took Wordsworth, and he was a representative of the first generation of romantics. And today we're doing Shelley, who happens to be a second generation romantic. Do we have differences? Yes, we have differences. Are they radical? Yes, they are. But they still belong to the same school, and they, communicate the same ideas and the same feelings. Again, they are romantics, but romantics in their own unique and different ways. When we spoke about Wordsworth, we said that Wordsworth is a nature poet, and he happens to be perhaps the greatest nature poet in English literature. So as you can see with Wordsworth, the focus is on nature. The focus is on this engagement between nature and the poet, if you like. With Shelley, it is true that we have elements of nature in his poems, but you perhaps have, a more ambitious project that would encompass other aspects of life. So there is nature, it is true, but there is also other aspects of life presented in his poems. He has always been referred to as a political radical, so you're going to see political involvement in some of his poems. You will also have this concern with what makes a poet, and the role of imagination, or the imagination in producing poetry. This is also a concern that Shelley communicates from time to time. You need only to look at the gallery of poems that we're dealing with today or tonight to see how diverse Shelley is. Look at the poems. Okay, can you see them? The ones I am highlighting in green, for example. You have To a Skylark, Ode to the West Wind, England in 1819, The Mask of Anarchy, To the Lord Chancellor, Ozymandias, written on hearing the news of the death of Napoleon. When you look at them, when you think about them, you see some kind of, a tapestry of engagements and of concerns, if you like. To a skylark, obviously a skylark is a bird. So you're talking, perhaps at one point you may think that he's talking about nature, which is true, but somehow he talks about nature, and he also, or he takes his nature as background, but he talks about the poet and the vocation of the poet, and how perhaps similar the poet is to a skylark in terms of producing poetry. I mean, skylark sings and the poetry somehow sings. So what kind of songs come out? This is perhaps the difference between a skylark and the poet, as we're going to see. When you look at Ode to the West Wind, so he is also addressing another, aspect of nature, which is the wind. Okay. We'll see how he engages with nature in this poem. Also, when you think of the associations of the wind, and with wind, you're also flying. It's not something earthly. So we're talking about whatever is above, whatever is perhaps not human, whatever is immortal in a sense. Okay, so we'll talk more about that. Now, I'm just showing you how diverse he is, how uh, different the ideas are. He's not. This is perhaps part of his character and his nature. In a minute, we're going to talk about his quote unquote fragmented self, as opposed to the unitary self that Wordsworth is posing in his poems. Okay? And then we have England in 1819. And when I say England in 1819, you may truly think that this is political, for example. Perhaps he's going to talk about England, talk about from perhaps a political point of view, and all these kinds of things. I need to do something. Yeah, I think I. Okay. Okay. And then we go to the Mask of Anarchy, another poem. And the word anarchy is more or less a variation on the word chaos. And from our experience, chaos and anarchy have perhaps political overtones. But the poem is also about politics. Okay, so he started off talking about nature in one of the poems, or in two of his poems, and the relationship between the poet and the imagination, and how poetry is produced. And then we have talk about politics and perhaps political issues in England, in a poem like England 1819 and the Mask of Anarchy. And then we have another poem called to the Lord Chancellor. And a chancellor is like a minister of perhaps finance or something. Okay, so again, if you're addressing a minister in a given government, it means that you have a kind of political message and you're trying to perhaps get it across. See, this is also political. And then Ozymandias. Ozymandias is the name given to one of ancient Egypt's greatest rulers, Ramses II or Ramses II. And this goes back to history. So there is a measure of history in his poems, again adding to the diversity that he is obviously advocating in his poems. Yes, and then written on hearing the news of the death of Napoleon. Napoleon is also a historical figure. is a political leader, is a military leader. So again, you have an aspect of politics and history. So if you compare, you don't have to read and study and analyze the poems of Shelley, for example, in order to see how different he is from Wordsworth. With Wordsworth, the focus is obviously on one or two ideas: the idea of nature and the relationship between nature and the poet, and what comes out of this relationship. With Shelley, who happens to be a second generation poet, or a second generation romantic poet, you have perhaps a different story. You have a more diverse body of work, um, that has political engagement, that has also a concern with the poet and his position in the universe. At one point, he would refer to poets as prophets, as legislators. Um, Again, you have a bit of history, and mentioning history and kind of talking about historical figures, and giving us their examples in order perhaps to point to the vanity of human wishes. So high they were, but at the end, where are they now? They are under, you know, the sand, or under the soil, and they are being um, trodden by people. This is perhaps a reference to the vanity of human wishes, as we're going to see. Um, so this is Shelley that we're talking about tonight. So it's Percy Bysshe Shelley, and we're talking about the inner and outer lives. This is the title of the chapter, and this is again taken from book 2, Romantics and Victorians. We're going to start the whole story with the poem To a Skylark. But before we do just that, we need to highlight the fact that when we spoke about Wordsworth last time, we spoke about this idea of the poet coming from time to time and editing himself. So the poet was his own editor, and he edited his poems. Remember when we spoke about even the stanzas. Sometimes when you look at a poem and you look for it in two different sources, you find in one source you have like 5 stanzas, in another source you have 4. Again, this has to do with Wordsworth having the time at the end of his career to kind of edit what he has written, which is a privilege that was not given to Shelley. You get to know that Shelley died very untimely. He died very early, in his early 30s, 29 or something. So he wasn't able to edit his poetry, and he wasn't able to edit even his life. At one point, his wife, Mary Shelley, will have to take it upon herself to edit even the political positions that he took. Um, he died obviously, and he left her behind. And in order to perhaps secure and sustain interest in his poetry, so that she can have kind of money out of it for for survival purposes, she would have to defend him against people and conservatives who saw his poetry very radical and very politically charged. So she had to come up with like perhaps introductions and prefaces to his poetry or his collections of poetry, and she would say that he didn't mean what you guys understood in one of the poems. No, this is not political. This is not what he meant. He meant well. So you have a whole life being edited, and the editor here is not the poet himself, who may at one point rethink his situations. It's a family member. Again, we're also stressing the fact that with Wordsworth you have this geometry self. Of course, you have this idea of aloneness, solitude, but there is this stress on the poet being alone in nature, even if he has people around him. Remember, in one of the poems, in the Daffodils, for example, when you read the poem, you think that Wordsworth was alone. But when you read the diary and the journal of his sister Dorothy, you'll find that he was one among many people during this kind of trip that they made. And we even this when you spoke about this part, we said that this is perhaps the difference between a poet who wants to keep or to stay in the public eye for as long as he can, who is ambitious, and the entries of a diary of a girl or a lady in the 19th century, where women were not given the opportunity to kind of express themselves. So she has to keep to herself. She has to, write, in a diary, and normally diaries are not given to other people to read. Um, uh, it's by comparing Dorothy and what she writes to Wordsworth that you can know more about the Romantic poet, especially those first generation poets where the focus was on themselves. I mean, to the extent that you may think that the poet is, in those very self-isolating attitudes. He is selfish. He doesn't care about others. He keeps to himself entirely, out of touch with reality, totally out of touch with reality. And this is actually what Wordsworth himself realized. And this is what he at one point would stop and say, no, we're not like this. If this is the impression that you're getting about us, you are wrong. We're politically committed. We have concerns. We care about the world. And that's why perhaps he wrote poems like Point Trash. Remember this poem? What was the name of the poem? Point Rash Judgment, for example, and other politically charged poems. He was trying to kind of dismiss the impression that some people may have about him as a solitary poet who only cares about his own concerns as a poet. He says no, and this is the example, and this is the proof. I also write poetry that is diverse, that has humanity and the concerns of humanity in mind. Okay. This is even more pointed with Shelley. With Shelley, you never had those impressions that you got about Wordsworth at the beginning. You wouldn't say that Shelley is perhaps that selfish, self-isolating poet who cares only about his poetry and his poetic experience. With Shelley, you have somebody who is given and who is open to different subject matter. Sometimes you also may think that he was also writing some of the poems for personal reasons. When you look, for example, at the poem, uh, this poem that we spoke about, where is that? To the Lord Chancellor. To the Lord Chancellor is a poem where he attacks and accuses the Chancellor of things because of his, I mean, his kids. I mean, at one point, his kids will be taken away from him. And he has to write this poem. But this is personal, but again, there is obviously more to the poetry of Shelley than just this personal poem. I mean, he has a whole output, and it's full of poetry that range from the political to the imaginary to the natural, as we'll see in a minute. Am I making sense? Okay, good. So we're starting with To a Skylark. So have you had the opportunity to go over them like I told you, like I asked you? Did you read them? Hello? Okay, so Abir did. Who else? Only Abir? Okay, so it's Abir and full stop. No, Jihan also read the poems. Okay. So To a Skylark, whatever you understood. So let's talk about. I mean, I don't want to influence you in any way. I don't want to impose my own interpretation of the poem. So I would like to hear what conclusions and assessments you came out with now that you read the poem. Did you feel those romantic touches that we're now familiar with? So how romantic Shelley is. You may want to come to the mic. The mic is active. So if you would like to come to the mic, no problem. Hmm. I cannot hear Abir. Can you guys hear her? No, right? Hmm. Abir, we cannot hear you unless you're still kind of trying. Okay, so until we are ready with Abir, who else would like to perhaps talk about To a Skylark? Talk about it, of course. You don't talk to a To a Skylark is obviously the name of the poem, right? The title of the poem. Okay. So I think I have the poem. Let me check. Yeah, this is the poem To a Skylark. So my question was about um, how similar or different the poem is when it comes to romantic poetry. Jihan is saying Skylark is a poem that focuses on how the bird fly high and sing. Okay. Obviously, this is the surface meaning. There is obviously more to this idea of flying and this idea of singing than just singing and flying, obviously, right? It's deeper than that, ya Jihan. Okay. Um, Abir is saying that there is a problem with her mic, and when she connects it, the voice uh, yeah, the sound of the perhaps my sound does not appear. Okay. If you would like to go out and come back, no problem. If you think this is going to take longer than we can afford, perhaps next time, no problem. Okay, so to a Skylark, the title is very significant. Obviously, when you say to something, it means that he is addressing something or someone. Here he is addressing a Skylark, and a Skylark happens to be a bird. Okay. What are some of the features and qualities if you have done any research about the Skylark? Skylark is a bird whose voice, if we can say that he has a voice, is very melodious. He has a melody to it. He has, I mean, this creature sings, and of course the idea of flying. Okay, so on different levels, you have the poet identifying himself with an element of nature, but this element of nature is not on earth. It is in the sky. It is uh, um, over there where there is this idea of flight, this idea of perhaps flying away from the here and the now. Okay, and again, singing. The idea of singing has always been associated in literature with, you know, when you sing, you also it has a measure of freedom to it. Okay, remember, in order to perhaps get, rid of the pressures that are imposed on you, at one point you may sing in order to divert your attention away from whatever is happening to you. If you look at you haven't done African American literature. There were those beautiful songs that were called the blues, and the blues are songs and poetic narratives that the slaves, Afro-American slaves, were singing during or while working, perhaps in the fields. They were, of course, exposed to very extreme conditions, and in order to momentarily forget about their pains and their sufferings and miseries, they would engage in singing. So singing is about give you the opportunity and the chance to momentarily fly away from the here and the now. It is true that you may be stuck in this local environment where you are, but with your singing, if you're singing, you can kind of go beyond the chains that you have, the extreme pressures that society may impose on you. And this is exactly what Shelley sees in this Skylark. He sees in it this power of this liberating power, the fact that if you're a bird, you can always fly away. Okay. And of course, if you are a skylark with the ability to sing, you also have another opportunity to also travel away from the cares and the worries of the here and the now. Okay. um, Amira is saying, Jihan is saying the poet wants to convey by his imagination. Convey what? Human song can never aspire to match that of the skylark. Yeah, this is one of the levels of interpretations, like Jihan is saying. It is true that the poet is trying to identify with the bird in his singing, and perhaps in this idea of flying away. But of course, and this is what he says in the poem. No matter how much he tries to kind of, perhaps copy the skylark, he cannot. I mean, the songs that the skylark produces are perhaps more beautiful, um, and stuff like that, like this, as we're going to see. Um, Somebody wanted to say some. Amira is saying that when I read the poem, it's almost like he's talking about heaven and nature. Okay. Okay. Amira is saying again about the existence of the bird that is singing. Okay. 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 طيب. So to a skylark, and this is the poem. Okay. So hail to thee. Obviously, he's addressing the poem. Hail means, um, like when you say long live and stuff. When you greet somebody, play spirit, bird. Bird thou never wert, that from heaven or near it pourest thy full heart in profuse strains of unpremeditated art. So this is very important. You know what is premeditated? When I say that something is premeditated, it means that it is done deliberately on purpose. Okay? And the romantics are normally against whatever is artificial and whatever is man-made. Okay, so what is it that he is trying to say? He is talking to the bird, and he's saying that whatever songs this bird sings are not, you know, they are not done deliberately, because this would be design, this would be kind of artificial, and he's talking about something natural. So higher still and higher from the earth thou springest, like a cloud of fire. The blue deep thou wingest, and sing still thus soar and soaring and ever singest. So again, he's talking about the idea of the bird moving up and up and up with his singing. Every time the bird sings, he goes up. And again, the associations of higher and up are very clear. You're talking about moving away from perhaps the miserable now and here on earth. You're flying away where there is no restrictions, there is no limitations of any type. The bird here, as presented by Shelley, is giving us an image of liberation. He is not only liberating the poet who identifies with it, but is also liberating the reader. In the golden lightning of the sun, over which clouds are brightening, thou dost float and run like an unbodied joy whose race is just begun. Again, so at one point we're talking about what? We're talking about moving up and higher and higher. At one point we're talking about something that is unpremeditated, natural, not deliberate. And he also says that it is the joy that he perhaps gets out of the singing of the bird is unbodied. Unbodied, it means that you cannot capture it in concrete terms. You wouldn't be able to use worldly or earthly expressions to capture the joy and the happiness that this kind of bird is spreading around the world. Okay, it's just unbodied. You cannot describe it in physical terms. It is undescribable, if you like. So the pale purple even melts around thy flight, like a star of heaven in the broad daylight. Thou art unseen, but yet I hear thy shrill delight. Again, if you ask me, Shelley here is trying to say that those normal senses that we're using, our sense experience doesn't work with this kind of bird, with this kind of flying and singing, pure as it is, beautiful as it is, unbodied as it is, unpremeditated as it is. You cannot use your usual senses to feel them. This is something way beyond our normal senses, and this is perhaps the challenge and the beauty of it, according to Shelley. So thou art unseen, but yet I hear thy shrill delight. Okay, you may be traveling away, and in this sense, if you travel away, my eyes wouldn't be able to see you within a certain range, right? But the singing with its beauty and innocence and everything is echoing in my ears. Keen as are the arrows of that silver sphere, whose intense lamp narrows in the white dawn clear, until we hardly see, we feel that it is there. Again, you fly very far away, but we can still feel you, hear you. All the earth and air with thy voice is loud, as when night is bare from one lonely cloud, the moon rains out her beams and heaven is overflowed. This is the effect of the bird. This is the effect of the singing of the bird. What thou art we know not. Okay, we cannot really, for all these descriptions that we're pondering over, we cannot really unlock your secrets, you bird, because you're not describable, like we said. You're not just another bird. You're not just another element of nature. There is obviously more to you, the Skylark, than just that. Okay, and the poet is expressing it very explicitly by asking this rhetorical question: what thou art we know not. We don't know what you are in terms of it's not that we don't know what you are. It's about, perhaps being amazed at who you are and your capabilities, your singing abilities, and all these kinds of things. What is most like thee? From rainbow clouds there flow not drops so bright to see, as from thy presence showers a rain of melody. Okay? What is most like thee? Nothing is like you, but we cannot really capture your nature. We cannot really define your identity. You're something more supreme than we're giving you credit for. You're something higher than we give you credit for. And from thy presence showers a rain of men. What I know, perhaps this is the only fact about you that I can comprehend and understand, uh, which is the fact that in your presence, when you're there, uh, uh, a rain of melody starts. Melody means singing and happiness and cheerfulness and all these kinds of. Okay, this was all about the poet. I'm sorry. This was all about the bird and what the bird stands for in terms of liberty, in terms of um, unearthly saying, in terms of not the inability to kind of capture what it does and what it stands for. And then we have a shift in the poem. We're moving from the bird, now that we have established what the bird is in terms of abilities and in terms of powers. We're moving to the poet. Okay, like a poet hidden in the light of thought, singing hymns unbidden, till the world is rude to sympathy with hopes and fears it heeded not. He's somehow comparing the poet and the experience of the poet to the bird. Again, he also refers to what the poet does. I mean, in those moments of creation, the poet is hidden, is engaged with thoughts, um, and it is as if he is praying. The word hymns is something that you do when you pray, and praying and prayers here means that you approach the act of creation, of poetic creation, with reverence, with seriousness that you only accord to praying. Till the world is wrought to sympathy with hopes and fears it heeded not. And while writing poetry, um, as a poet, I divorce myself completely from the world. I don't heed, hopes. I don't think about fears. I focus on this moment of creation that does not come so often. So, like a high-born maiden in a palace tower, soothing her love-laden soul in her secret hour, with music sweet as love which overflows her bower. Again, it's a continuation of what happens with the poet during the moments of creation. Again, like a glowworm golden in a dell of dew, scattering unbeholden, it's a real hue or who among the flowers and grass which screen it from the view. And then he keeps talking about the poet and what the poet does during these moments of creation. Okay, and then he goes back again. He is trying to here. He is glorifying this act of creation upon the part of the poet in order to give us another surprise. The other surprise after he has spoken about poetry and the creation of poetry as if it is something that people take it so seriously, like they take praying, for example. He's telling us that, and then all of a sudden he comes back to the skylark and to the bird, and he would say that it is true that the poet is something big, that the poet is that poetry is like prayers that would need special perhaps preparation and stuff. But again, the bird and its singing are far better than the creation of the poet. I mean, the creation of the poet cannot compare, okay, cannot compare to that singing of the bird. And that's why he would say again, so joyous, and this is the last line, joyous and clear and fresh, thy music does surpass. See, after all of that preparation, after all of that talk about the process of creating poetry and how beautiful it is and how, you know, grand and sacred it is, he comes and says that the joy and the clarity and the freshness of the music that we get from the bird is far better than that uh, production by the poet. That's why he is encouraged, based on the above, based on the comparison that he made in the previous stanzas between the creation of the poet and the creation of the bird. He is now encouraged to ask the bird to teach us perhaps the poets and also human beings in general, the readers. So teach us, sprite or bird, what sweet thoughts are thine? I have never heard praise of love or wine that panted forth a flood of rapture so divine. Teach us. And while teaching us, you need to tell us, bird, please tell us what happens. What is it? What are those sweet sensations that we get out of perhaps hearing you sing and seeing you fly? What's this? You need to tell us, but if you're going to teach us, and we now know and appreciate you, we need you to tell us why you are. I mean, um, you produce such sweet songs and all these kinds of things. So chorus hymnal or triumphal chant, march with thine would be all, but an empty want, a thing wherein we feel there is something hidden want. Again, you're accorded all the respect and the honor, and we admit that you're far better than us. But you need to tell us, I mean, to explain this gap that we see. Why are you like this? What what is it that you do so that we have those sweet sensations? What objects are the fountains of thy happy strain? What fields or waves or mountains? What shapes of sky or plain? What love of thine own kind? What ignorance of pain? It's again a variation on this praise that he is heaping and that he is piling up on this element of nature that we call the sky lark. So with thy clear keen giants, languor cannot be, shadow of annoyance never came near thee. Thou lovest, but never knew lovest sad. Again, you're so beautiful. Everything about you is joyous, and that's why you're never attacked with perhaps pain. You're never overtaken with um, annoyance. You don't have those earthly and those human cares and concerns, because you are somewhere high in heaven. You're not on earth. You're not tied down with the pressures, the earthly uh, uh, pressures. Waking or asleep, thou of death must deem things more true and deep than we mortals dream. Or how could thy notes flow in such a crystal stream? It's a variation. Yeah, it's a variation on the same. I mean, it's again heaping praise on the Skylark. We look before and after and pine for what is not. Our sincerest laughter with some pain is fraught. Our sweetest songs are those that tell of saddest thought. Um, Perhaps it was an opportunity for Shelley. It is true that he's talking about the Skylark, and he's giving us praise, and Stoking, I mean, he is moving, or he is bordering on the hyperbolic. When you when I say that somebody is using hyperbole means that he is using an exaggerated language, which he does in praising the Skylark, right? In referring to the whole experience as if it is a divine experience. This is that this business of glorifying the bird is way perhaps too much. Okay. But he finds it on the other hand, and in the same breath you would think of it as a chance or an opportunity for the poet to talk about, um, to perhaps make a comparison between human existence, which is fraught with perhaps sadness and misery and all these kinds of things, and the life of a bird, which the poet thinks is full of joy, of divine grace and beauty and all these kinds of things. Again, the poet is trying to also is trying to say that even when we as human poets, when we produce poetry and we say that this is the joyous and the most or the happiest poetry that we can ever produce, it is full of sad thoughts. So it is as if he is trying to say that misery and suffering are part and parcel of the human condition. These are things that you cannot, as long as you are called a human being, and as long as you live on a planet called Earth, there is going to be misery and suffering. If it's not you, it is somebody else that is perhaps related to you, right? You can think of the Indian proverb. There is an Indian proverb that says, "Never say happy until you die." So as long as you are on Earth, you may be perhaps enjoying something now, enjoying health, for example, or money, but you haven't died on this note yet. You haven't died on the note that you're rich or you're happy or you're healthy, because the next thing you know is that you're tomorrow, God forbid, unhealthy, you have a disease, you lose your money. Okay, never say. I mean, it seems that Shelley is perhaps echoing this Indian proverb, Never say happy. As long as you are on earth, as long as you inhabit this world, never say happy until you die. Okay? So our sweetest songs are those that tell of saddest thoughts. And we think that they are sweet. We think that they are the most happiest of songs. Again, they have an element of sadness to them. As if suffering, like I said, is part of the human condition. Yet if we could scorn hate and pride and fear, if we were things born not to shed a tear, I know not how thy joy we ever should come near. We cannot come close. The joy that you spread the place with is uncomparable. Better than all measures of delight sound, better than all treasures that in books are found, thy skill to poet were, thou scorner of the ground. You are, in a nutshell, the scorner of the ground. You look at our achievements as poets, you look at our achievements from high above, because you have this panoramic view being a bird. You look at all what we're doing as poets, and we think that we're doing much and we're doing great stuff, and you make fun of them because they cannot compare to what you're doing. See, it's getting it's getting very it's getting on my nerves. Every time I think that he is going to stop, but he starts to kind of start it all over again, glorifying and heaping praise on the bird. Teach me half the gladness that thy brain must know. Such harmonious madness from my lips would flow, that world should listen then as I am listening now. Okay, again, he's looking at the bird as a teacher, and he says, I'm not greedy. Just tell me, perhaps unlock half of your secrets when it comes to making people happy. Spreading this atmosphere of cheerfulness and happiness. Teach me half the gladness that thy brain must know. See? And I am listening. The world should listen. He's addressing everyone and saying that we should all listen to the bird, and they should listen as I am listening now. Again, we can think of it as very humble of him. This is Abir saying, a romantic, especially when compared to Wordsworth. You mean humility? You means that he is he doesn't want to he's so simple, he's not full of himself. Yeah, perhaps that would be an interpretation. Again, this is the poem, and as you can see, we're talking about an element of nature and the skylark. But obviously this element of nature is not just another element of nature. There is a great deal of hyperbole in what he says about the bird. At one point he would compare the process of creating poetry to that process of creating songs by the bird. And he would say that you cannot compare the two because with the birds, the end results are far better, are way better than those of the poet. Again, towards the end, he would say that this skylark is a teacher and we should all learn from it. Okay, whether we're going to learn values and principles, if he has this in mind, or we as poets, and, I mean Shelley and others, can learn from it how to create songs and to fill the world with joy and bliss. And they wouldn't be able, of course, to produce something similar, but at least they, with the teaching of the Skylark, they can come close to achieving that. Okay, so this is the first poem. um, we'll move to the second poem. I think I'm moving with it so that it can get recorded. Just give me a second. Okay. Okay. So let's move to the second poem. And the second poem is Ode to the West Wind. It's an ode, and an ode is also uh, a kind of poetry, and it is lyrical for the most part. Lyrical means that there is a great deal about the self of the poet. It's also about the poet. So I think I have it. Let me. Okay, so Ode to the West Wind. Did you read that? Did you read the poem? Let me ask you. Okay, so Abir did. So it's Ode to the West Wind. So it's another two to the last. The previous poem was to the Skylark. This time around it's to the West Wind. Right? Okay. And it is an ode. An ode promises us things. What is it that an ode would promise us when we know that a poem is an ode? It promises us a great deal of what we call lyricism. Lyricism means poetry um, about and on the poet himself. Okay, so you expect with this two kind of thing, ode to, and then it is an ode. So with ode and the word to, you can always expect that there is going to be comparisons and correspondence, okay, between the poet and an element, perhaps an element of nature. Uh, and this element of nature this time around is not a skylark, it is the wind. The wind is an element of nature, right? He's very faithful to the this romantic concern with nature, right? But what kind of wind? Because obviously you have different types of winds. It's the west wind. And in the popular imagination, in the Western popular imagination, the west is a reference to death. Remember, we're talking about Shelley, who died very young. Um, I don't know at what. I mean, he didn't live long, so that we can say that perhaps this was at the beginning or at the end of his life, because it was only. I mean, his lifespan was curtailed or cut very short, at perhaps 29 or something. So whether um, he knew that he would die shortly and untimely, or whether he has those, sometimes those uh, poets. I mean, poets are sensitive and they have those suicidal inclinations. Perhaps death for them would be another experience. So by invoking the west wind, he may be kind of anticipating what is going to happen to him, the fact that he's going to die shortly. Or perhaps he is nursing suicidal inclinations as a poet, and poets are, sensitive and weird, and they stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, Abir is confirming what I thought of, the idea that he wrote it 3 years before his death. Okay, so again, ode promises, when the associations of the word ode means that there is going to be a great deal of lyricism and personal talk. I mean, he's talking about his own experience. Allah Akbar, Allah. And like I said, ode to the wind, and wind is an element of nature. Again, wind is above, right? It's not something that is tied to earth. So again, the idea of freedom, the idea of liberty. But it's west wind. West wind, and west, like I said, west wind in the Western popular imagination is somehow tied down to the idea of death. Okay, we're going to stop for perhaps 5 minutes for the prayers, and then when we come back, we can always continue, inshallah. So I'll see you in 5 minutes, inshallah. Okay, bye bye. Okay, so are we back? Okay, hi Budur, Ranim, and everybody. Okay, good. Before I continue, I have noticed that we have like 4 people who haven't submitted their TMAs, and the 2 gentlemen that we have in class haven't submitted their TMAs. Any specific reason? Because the system is now, closed. There is no way we. But I need an explanation. They attend and everything, and the next thing is that they are ready to sacrifice 50 marks. That's too much, obviously. So, do we have these people? I think one of them is called Abdurrahman Al Ustaz, I think, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm not confusing courses and classes like always because of this, like I told you, cognitive decline that I am having and suffering from, perhaps. So we don't have those or these 2 gentlemen. Um, One of them is called Abdurrahman Al Ustaz, and the other is, I think, Fahd or something. Okay, Budur, yes, Budur is saying, could you provide us with the names to announce them on? Like I told you, one of them is called Al Ustaz, Abdurrahman Al Ustaz, and the other is Fahd, I think. There is, yeah, I can always go to the, let me see how I can do that. Just give me a second. I'm hopeful that I'm not going to crumble everything down, because I cannot afford that. Bu- 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 anonymous. You see, خلود فيصل الدهيري or دهري. Riham Abdul Rashid. I know for a fact that Riham does not belong. There is obviously a mistake. She shouldn't be here. So we have Khulud. We have Abdul Rahman Jihad Al Ustaz. He hasn't submitted his TMA. Fahd Ahmad Al Ghudyan. Okay, is that clear? I'm talking about something else, ya Jama'ah. Don't confuse stuff. It's not about the marks now. Okay, that's it. So these are the people who haven't submitted their TMAs, and it's 50 marks, and 50 marks is no small thing. So if you happen to know them, please ask them to kind of contact me so that I see what I can do. Okay, so we'll go out. Okay, and then go back. Okay. Yeah, I mean I don't know where were they. I mean the TMA has been there for the past month or so, right? Um, okay, so we don't have much time. So we'll have to move, and the pace has to move too. I mean, it has to be quicker than that. So Ode to the West Wind, we spoke about the title already. Again, he is invoking the west wind. He's talking to and addressing the west wind, and we now know what the west wind stands for in the imagination, the popular imagination of people of the West. O wild west wind, thou breath of autumn being, thou from whose unseen presence the leaves that are driven like ghosts from an enchanter fleeing, yellow and black and pale and hectic, red, pestilence stricken multitudes, O thou, who chariotest to their dark wintry bed, red and bed, of course, the winged seeds where they lie cold and low, each like a corpse within its grave until thy azure sister of the spring shall blow, low and blow, her clarion over the dreaming earth and fell, driving sweet buds like flocks to feed in air with living hues and odors plain and hell, while wild spirit which are moving everywhere, destroyer and preserver here, oh here. And this is only one. The ode is divided into a number of parts, and I'm just reading the first part because this is going to get repeated. I mean, it's the same spirit, and it's the same power of the imagination that we're having reflected in every and each part. Okay, so the first part is actually a representation of what is happening. So let's look at the most, yeah, the clearest, or some of the prominent ideas that may have caught your eyes in the first part. So, oh, wild west wind. So again, this idea of wild reminds us of this romantic tendency to kind of relate to whatever is wild, to whatever is weird, and whatever is not artificial, because obviously wild means it's not tended or harnessed or domesticated by human beings. Okay, so this is right from the very beginning a romantic echo. So addressing whatever is wild, not whatever is harnessed or domesticated. And this is a typical romantic attitude, right? Oh, wild west wind, thou breath of autumn's being. Okay, so he is obviously referring, I mean, he's setting it in time and place. It's autumn, right? And it's the west wind, and it's end of life, if you like. Thou, from whose unseen presence the leaves dead. Okay, so we have this is going to be sustained all through. I mean, the idea of this wind as being a destroyer and a builder at the same time. Here in this stanza, it is presented as a destroyer. Okay, thou from whose unseen presence the leaves dead are driven. It drives away those dead leaves, like ghosts from an enchanter fleeing. Okay, so you are like an enchanter who, whose presence kind of prompt ghosts to flee away. Okay, so typical of winds, when they come and there are dead leaves on the ground, it sweeps them away, it takes them away, right? Yellow and black and pale and hectic, red, pestilence-stricken multitudes, O thou who chargest to their dark wintry bed. You sweep all of this away, O wind, great as you are. The wind seats where thy lie cold and low, each like a corpse within its grave, until thine azure sister of the spring shall blow. It is as if you are preparing the ground for another wind that is associated with spring, and this time around you have life, you have liveliness. Okay, because it's spring. The other one was autumn and winter. Now it's spring, where you have I mean, openness, right? You have brightness, you have sunny weather, right? So again, you're taking away dead leaves, and this is obviously something that you're doing in order to prepare the ground for new life. So it's not bad after all. So her clarion over the dreaming earth and fell, driving sweet buds like flocks to feed in air, with living hues and odors plain in hell. But this is marking the start of a new life. Okay, so you start off sweeping away whatever is dead, and perhaps you contribute to this death with your perhaps coldness and everything. Okay, but you also prepare the ground for spring, for the winds that are associated with spring. So I'm asking you, obviously, I'm asking, as a poet, I'm asking you wild spirit, again wild in a positive sense according to the romantics, which art moving, you're everywhere. Okay, you're a destroyer at times and a preserver at times. Destroyer of what? Destroyer of perhaps you know, trees and plants that are more or less related and associated with autumn and winter. And why do you destroy them? So that you prepare the ground for a new life. So if they stay and they are old and they are yellow and pale, if they stay and you don't take them away, there is no way new life will come out in spring. But actually, you're doing. I mean, it is as if he is saying that you're doing humanity a service and a favor by destroying whatever needs to be destroyed, so that you can preserve a place for new life in spring. Okay. So it's nature that he is addressing. Okay, he is obviously not involved so far. So thou on whose stream met the steep sky's commotion, loose clouds like earth decaying leaves are shed, shook from the tangled boughs of heaven and ocean. Again, glorifying this kind of wind, whether you're talking about heaven or earth or ocean. Angels of rain and lightning, there are spread on the blue surface of thine airy surge, like the bright hair uplifted from the head. Again, when you come over, O west wind, you carry angels of rain and lightning. There is lightning and there is rain. Okay? And those elements are spread on the blue surface of thine airy surge. I mean, you fill the whole area or the whole world with those beautiful, scenes and those beautiful things. So, oh, some fierce Manyad, even from the dim verge of the horizon to zenith height, the locks of the approaching storm thou dash. And then another elements of nature would come over, and there is a conflict of a sort, but you subdue them. You manage to control them. Thou dirge of the dying year, to which this closing night will be the dome of a vast sculpture, vaulted with all thy congregated might. Again, referring to how powerful this wind is. Of vapors from whose solid atmosphere black rain and fire and hail will burst, O hear. Thou who didst waken from this summer dreams, the blue Mediterranean, where he lay, lulled by the coil of his crystalline streams, beside a Pomus isle in Bay. This is, I think, Italy or something. Remember, he used to reside and live in Italy. And so in sleep all palaces and towers, quivering within the waves' intensest day. Obviously, he's talking about the poet and whatever goes on in his imagination. All overgrown with azure moss and flowers, so sweet the sense feigns picturing them, thou for those paths the Atlantic level bows. Again, you're all over the place. You're at one point, you are on the shores of the Mediterranean, and the next thing you know that you are also on the Atlantic. Cleave themselves into chasms, while far below the sea plumes and the oozy woods which wear the sapless foliage of the ocean know thy voice, and suddenly grow grey with fear, and tremble and despoil themselves, O hear. You see how strong those other elements of nature are, but in the presence of this west when they are valueless, they are powerless, they are speechless. Okay, so he has prepared the grounds for what is coming. I mean, it's exactly like the other poem. He starts off by glorifying an element of nature, and by talking about how powerful it is, by talking about its effect on the other elements of nature, including human beings and poets. And then there comes a time when he says, You see how strong it is. We need to perhaps become part of it. We need to be swept by it. We need to learn from it. See, this is what we did with uh, to the Skylark, right? Beautiful voice, voice that cannot, and beautiful songs that cannot be compared to any songs, okay, by human beings or otherwise. And then the next thing you know is that he is appealing to the Skylark to become his teacher, right? It's the same thing here. He started off talking about the west wind, invoking it, talking about its perhaps contradictory nature as a destroyer and a builder and a preserver at the same time. And he comes to the conclusion, if it is that powerful, if it is that strong, we need we need to be part of it. So how are you going to be part of it, Shelley? This is what he's going to say. If I were a dead leaf thou mightest bear, if I were a swift cloud to fly with thee, a wave to pant beneath thy power and cheer. He wants to be a leaf, because when the wind comes, it's going to sweep it away. So isn't that bad, sweeping him away? No, he means to say, it might seem that that it is me who wants to be swept away. Actually, it's not me. It may be my soul. It may be my poetry. So the west wind is the only element of nature that is powerful enough so that and it can carry my thoughts and ideas and poetry to the other parts of the world. So if I were a dead leaf, which I will at one point because I'm going to die, if I were a dead leaf, thou mightest bear, and you can carry me. If I were a swift cloud to fly with thee, see, I want to be a dead leaf, or a cloud, or a wave, okay, anything. I just want to be associated with you. You're going to carry me away, and carrying me away would mean that you're going to carry my thoughts and ideas away, which means that they are going to be spread across perhaps the world. The impulse of thy strength only less free than thou, O uncontrollable, if even I were as in my boyhood and could be the comrade of thy wanderings over heaven, as then when to outstrip thy sky speed scarce seemed a vision I would never have striven. Okay, I cannot stop myself because obviously, as you can see, the lines, carry over to each other. It's the same line of thought. That's why you find it challenging to stop and say this captures a certain moment, because we have so many moments, we have so many lines of thoughts. Okay, so what is it that he's saying? I mean, you are uncontrollable, and obviously uncontrollable for him is a good thing. So it's an indication, and it is suggestive of how powerful this wind is. Again, he would engage in talk about his boyhood and what used to happen with him. As thus with thee in prayer in my sore need, O left me as a wave, a leaf, a cloud. I fall upon the thorns of life, I plead. Take me away in any capacity and in any form. Take me as a wave, left me as a leaf, take me as a cloud. Okay, then obviously I'm suffering like everybody else from the thorns of life, and I am bleeding. Unless you left me, I will keep bleeding. Oh, a heavy weight of ours had changed and bowed one to like the tameless and swift and proud. Again, you are timeless. You don't have regard to any element of nature, including time. You're tameless, which is good for them. You're swift and you are proud. Again, this is the spirit of the poet, the romantic poet. The romantic poet is tameless. Tameless, not domesticated. You cannot control him. You cannot control his spirit. And this applies very much to Shelley. That's why he was at loggerheads with government institutions. He's tameless. You cannot dictate to him what to say and what not to say. You cannot control him. So it's tameless, swift, and proud. Proud in a positive. If you take it in a positive, it would mean that you're proud of yourself. You're proud of your product, of your achievements. Not the other meaning. Not being full of yourself. Make me thy lyre. Lyre is more like it's a musical instrument, even as the forest is. What if my leaves are falling like its own, the tumult of thy mighty harmonies? I can be a lyre that you're playing on, a part of you. I want to be part of you. Will take from both a deep autumnal tone, sweet though in sadness. Be thou, spirit fierce, my spirit, be thou me, impetus one. Again, fierce, spirit, autumn. He is not denying the fact that this wind has a destructive element to it. It's so gigantic. Nothing can stop in its way. And perhaps this is the force that he wants. He wants to be associated with this kind of power, this powerful wind, so that nothing can stop in the face and in front of his poetry and his ideas. Drive my dead thoughts over the universe like withered leaves to quicken a new birth, and by the incantation of this verse scatter as from an unextinguished hearth ashes and sparks my words among mankind. And he is giving us what he wants. This was all a preparation to this moment. What is it that he wants? He wants it. I mean, again, he either has this death wish, or he knows that he's going to die shortly. Okay? What is it that he wants the wind to do? He wants the wind to drive his dead thoughts, his poetry, his ideas over the universe. So, who has this power from the poem? Who can do that? It's the wind, right? You see, the different stanzas are taking us to this point. Okay, and what it all came down to this point where the poet is declaring it very frankly and very honestly. He wants his dead thoughts to be carried away over the universe. And who can do that? It's the wind. Okay, and when it gets carried over to the universe, people are going to read, and this is a new beginning, because people are going to be affected by his ideas. And people are going to kind of read and recite his poetry, and they are going to get to know about his thoughts. Scatter as from an extinct hearth ashes and sparks, my words among mankind. So my words are going to be like ashes and sparks that are spread over the universe for every individual to kind of read, and be through my lips to an awakened earth. The trumpet of a prophecy, O wind, If winter comes, can spring be far behind? Okay, so by doing that, when it's as if you are using uh, a trumpet. You know what a trumpet is, and with the trumpet you are announcing a new prophecy. And the prophecy here would be the thoughts and the ideas of the poet. He believes in the idea of the poet prophet. Okay, actually, he is the one who devised and developed it. The concept that the poet is another prophet. With the prophets, you talk about, you know, moving around and spreading the word about uh, love and care. Uh, you're, you're, you have a mission. You have a mission, and you go around trying to make sure that this mission is fulfilled, just like any other prophet. So the trumpet of a prophecy, you are going to announce it. You're going to declare it when you take my thoughts and ideas and you carry them away, and then you spread them among mankinds in all, perhaps the four corners of the world. So, what do you think of this poem? It's a nice one, right? Okay. So let's move to a third one, and the third one would be England. So we're moving away from nature, and we're moving to perhaps politics with England 1819. Have you read this poem? England in 1819. Okay, and it's also a sonnet. I think it's a sonnet, right? Okay, let's go to it and see what it is all about. This is the poem. It's a sonnet. Let me. Yeah, it is a sonnet. A sonnet is a poem of 14 lines, right? And we have Shakespearean sonnets and any other sonnets. But this is a non-Shakespearean sonnet. Okay, so England in 1819, and the title is very significant, and it can tell you a great deal about what we are in for in the poem. So it's England that we're talking about, and it's the year 1819. So um, what happened in 1819? This is the question that the poem itself should answer. Okay. Okay. So England in 1819, an old, mad, blind, despised, and dying king, princes, the dregs of their dull race who flow through public scorn, mud from a muddy spring, rulers who neither see nor feel nor know, but leech like to their fainting country cling, till thy drop, blind in blood without a plough. A people starved and stabbed in the Untold Field, an army whose liberty side and prey makes as a two-edged sword to all who wield, golden and sanguine laws which tempt and slay, religion, Christless, godless, a book sealed, a senate, time's worst statue unrepealed, are graves from which a glorious phantom may burst to illuminate our tempest day. Okay. Whatever you have understood. So again, it's England that we're having, and it's the year 1819. See how he starts? He doesn't address anybody like he used to do with the previous two poems. He's talking about a scenario in front of his eyes, and it's the scenario that has different elements to it. And who are the elements of this scenario? You have an old, you have a king. And how does he describe the king? He describes him as being old, mad, blind, dying, and despised. So when you have this kind of start, you think that this is a good or a bad king. Okay, so obviously, look at the adjectives. How many adjectives is he using? He's using old, mad, blind, despised, dying, right? Okay. Which of them the king is responsible for? Is being old a bad thing? No, right? Is being mad a bad thing? No. Is being blind a bad thing? Something that right? And even dying is not a bad. It's like Abir is saying, the idea that it is despised. Why would you be despised? People don't come out of the blue and despise you or disdain you or make fun of you. People react to what you do. If you do something good, okay, so they are going to admire you and perhaps glorify and praise you. If you do otherwise, if you do something bad, they are going to despise you, right? So obviously we have a king who is despised, which means that he was bad. Okay, so he is bad, he is almost blind, he is almost mad, he is old and dying. So why settle with him? The question that the writer is or the poet is asking. So he has all the qualities or the negative qualities that would get him out of office, but he is there. So can a king like this rule? No, he cannot. Why are they keeping him? This is what we're going to know. Princes, the dregs of their dull race who flew through public school, mud from a muddy spring. Rulers who neither see nor feel nor know, but leech-like to their fainting country cling. Okay? So it is in the interest of those nobles and those princes that the king stays, because they have their own agendas and they are advancing their own agendas at the expense of the people. So, and he is describing them as leech-like. You know leeches? Yeah, I mean he doesn't know what is happening. I mean he is dying and blind and perhaps mad. Okay, so they are sucking the blood of the people. This is what is meant by leech-like. Okay, so people are not happy with what is happening, obviously. So rulers who neither see nor feel nor know, but leech-like to their fainting country cling, till they drop blind and blood without a blow. So the country is like perhaps I don't know how to describe it. It's like a creature or a human being or perhaps an animal, and you have other animals who are sucking blood out of it. So if they keep sucking, what is going to happen? This kind of animal or this kind of perhaps this human being is going to collapse, drop. Absolutely. So you wouldn't need to do anything with them. Just perhaps put your hands on them, and they are going to uh, fall down of their own accord. A people starved and stamped in the untilled field. So it's people that are suffering now because of this dying, despised, blind, mad, and old king. Okay, people are starving, no access to anything, no access to food, to okay, and stabbed in the untilled field. And he's giving us the different aspects of life where the king is fading, where the princes and the other rulers are fading. Yes, more or less, yes. Okay, so the first uh, thing he spoke about would be the untilled field, and it has two meanings. It would mean that fields and farms are neglected because of the corruption that is widespread. And it would also mean that all chances of reform are passed over, are not utilized, are not met. So a people starved and stabbed in the untilled field. So why would people starve? People starve because they don't have access to food. And where do you get food from? You get food from fields. And if those fields are untilled, bad luck. No access to food, right? People die. Okay, so this is agriculture, and it is being neglected. An army whom leopard size and prey makes as two-edged sword to all who wield. And then he talks about the military, and also how abusive now and how corrupt the military is now. Golden and sanguine laws which tempt and slay. And then he moves to um, the legal system, the judicial system, and he says, obviously, we have a problem with the court system. It's also corrupt. And then he moves to religion as a very important institution, and he said it is now at the core of Christianity and at the core of religion would be Christ. He says that there is no Christ in what they are doing. He says that Christ wouldn't approve what they are doing. This religion that we're having at the time, okay, is Christless, Godless. And the book is sealed. Obviously, they don't consult the Bible. They ignore it. Because if they read it, they are going to get inspired by it, and they can do good stuff. Obviously, they are sealing it. And then he moves to the parliament. A senate times worst statute unrepealed. Okay, and even the parliament is bad and corrupt. And the laws that they set and make are not made in the with the interest of the British people in mind, obviously. Okay, so these are all elements of a scenario. Okay, a corrupt and bad scenario that would act as graves. I mean, England now is more or less like a graveyard where all the active institutions, whether we're talking about uh, um, the royal court, we're talking about the parliament, we're talking about the military, or even the people of religion, all of them are in the grave, okay, dead. So, and all of a sudden there is a ray of hope, a phantom. So it's so dark, it's so gloomy, and it is so corrupt, and out of this gloom and corruption and all, there is a ray of light, a ray of hope. Okay, and this ray of hope promises better days ahead. Are you getting the idea? So amidst all this darkness, amidst all this blackness and this corruption, there exists a ray of hope that we are in for perhaps better days. And those better days may be an indication that a revolution is in the making. Remember, we referred to Shelley as a political radical. He has this radical ideas. Remember when we said that second generation poets are very radical and they wouldn't settle for compromises. It's either their way or no other way. And this is exactly what he is saying. Again, amidst all these networks of corruption and gloom and darkness, there is a hope for better days, for something, for a temptus day. Temptus means that it is going to be a big day, and obviously he's talking about a revolution that is in the making. Are you getting the idea? So very radical. Yeah. Obviously Mary Shelley will have a lot of explanation to make after he dies. No, he didn't mean it. I mean, she would go to them and say, listen, I need to perhaps publish his poetry. I said, no. I mean, your husband has always been a political radical. We don't accept that. So no, he didn't mean it. It was, this is too radical, right? I don't know how she's going to edit a whole poem that is anti-government, that is anti-religion, that is anti-military, that is anti-everything, that is promising and is promoting a revolution and revolutionary ideas. See, it's very interesting, right? Okay. So, okay. I think we'll stop on this note and with this item. And next time, inshallah, when we meet, we will finish off Shelley and then move to Hoffman. Yes. Yeah, we can always compare the two, inshallah. Not yet. Perhaps when we meet again. Inshallah, yeah. If I finish them tomorrow or the day after, I can always share them with you on the group. No, not yet. Perhaps tomorrow or the day after, Yabir. Okay. So again, we're meeting on Wednesday, and we're meeting on Wednesday at 4 p.m. We're not meeting tomorrow, okay? No tomorrow. Okay. On this note and with this item, we come to the end of tonight's class. Until we meet again, I wish you all the best. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Bye bye.